If there's other volunteers, I will also be delighted to step down, but if no one else steps up, I can try to keep going.
So let's, who hasn't done it for a while, please volunteer. That would be great.
For a minute taker?
Yeah, we're trying to see if we can share the pain a little bit here.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Any takers? Okay, we can't start until we have one. So if somebody could volunteer, it's very helpful and much appreciated. And the tool provided makes it easier. That's a selling point.
Takers, it's just as we're looking for other people to take over from us.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
All
right,
Eric
so you're
and
willing
Jessica
to
can help
continue?
out if no one else will do it. All right, well, let's get started. We're a minute over. So agenda is on the screen. We have SUID and EAT relation to IDEV-ID topic by Lawrence. So let's jump into that. And I can share slides if you want, Lawrence, or you can yourself, whichever. I can't hear you, Lawrence. Try it again. I thought I heard you.
Okay, now it's okay?
Yep.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, separate. The main new addition to EAT to be discussed today is SUEID. Please go to the next slide. So UEID and SUEID are device identifiers in that they identify, we identify a lot of different things in rats, and the intent here is to identify an instance of some hardware, a physical thing. So if you have 1 million devices, you have 1 million UEIDs. It's not an identification of the manufacturer or the vendor or the software or anything like that. This is focused strictly on individual bits of hardware. So UEID is defined today as a binary byte string, and there's 3 ways that are for constructing it. One is using a crypto quality random number generator, once when the device is created, or in a very similar way, hashing together a bunch of things that give you the equivalent result. Another way to do it is just to reuse a MAC address, same as an EUI64. The uniqueness of that, the global uniqueness of that, is based on management by the IEEE. And then you can also do a 14-byte IMEI. Again, that's managed, I think, by 3GPP, the uniqueness of it. All of these identifiers UEID is always intended to be globally unique without the need for any qualifier. So you don't need to add in like the vendor or the domain or the protocol or anything like that. They're just globally unique. So you can pick one up and know that it's globally unique. There's a statistical analysis in the appendix of the document for that justifies the size for the the random number generator based one. based on some comments from Geary, like I think a meeting or two ago, and some other things, realized that just having UEID by itself was probably not enough. That there is the need to have identifiers that change on life cycle events, such as a change of ownership, factory reset, maybe to address other privacy issues and stuff like that. Then I went and read the IDEV ID spec. I think that's IEEE 802.11AR, secure device IDs. I don't remember if I got the right IEEE number there, but and they have that has an IDEV ID and LDEV IDs. So I've added to the EAT spec an SUEID. Or a set of SUIDs. So a device can have multiple SUIDs, and they're basically exactly the same format as a UEID, and you have a list of them. There is a simple string label to distinguish one from another. So you know, if you have 3 of them, you could have 3 different strings identifying them, and they could be like the use case for which they were generated. For example, maybe one is for FIDO or for some application or something like that. So the identifying string could just be FIDO. No registry for the strings. I assume there's going to be only a small number of them. So that's the kind of top level of UEID and SUEID in the new edition of SUEID. I'm gonna keep going and wait for questions to the end, I think. Next slide. So I spent a fair bit of time trying to understand how EAT and its UEID might relate to an IDEV ID. So I went and looked at spent a lot of time reading IDEV ID and trying to understand that. And I kind of can categorize, there's 3 ways they can relate to each other. You know, the first way, and I'm going to go through these in detail in the next few slides. I mean, the first way is the IDEV ID is the sort of the key material and endorsement for use with the EAT protocol. So they're both implemented and they work together. The second is they're looked at as competitors. They both provide the identity of the device and a little bit of manufacturing information. It's one or the other. In this case, I think IDEV ID gets used with EAP. Then the third case is you take the EAT claims and kind of stuff them into an IDEV ID. And so EAT becomes, they're kind of both implemented, but EAT's not really a protocol. It's more just a set of claims that are put into an IDEV ID. So next slide. So I believe this is a picture of how I would imagine using the EAT protocol with IDEV ID. So you have an endorser or manufacturer that creates the Dev ID module, and they put a private key that's used for signing in the Dev ID module, and they put an endorsement certificate in the Dev ID module. I guess this is kind of passport model. No, it's not. Never mind that comment. Anyways, they put an endorsement in the Dev ID module. Then the attester is something that you know, just kind of surrounds or is larger than the Dev ID module. Always a nonce comes from the verifier or the relying party, and here I've just collapsed the verifier and relying party for simplicity. I mean, you can have that, you know, fully expanded to, but that it wasn't necessary to expand it here. So the nonce comes, and then the tester creates an EAT. It signs the EAT with the private key from the Dev ID module. And kind of the way I understand Dev IDs to work is that the endorsement goes along to the verifier, and then a root certificate goes separately. So this is how you would use them together. One interesting thing to note is that Dev ID modules or Dev ID endorsement certificates have a serial number of the device, not of the certificate, but of the device in the X509 subject field, they can have that. So if they have that in the subject field, and there is also a UEID, I would expect those two to be coordinated somehow, so they're basically the same, or one is derived from the other, so there's not like conflicting identifiers arriving at the relying party. I've been looking in a little more detail on that. A dev ID serial number is a text string up to quite a large number of bytes, so you can base 64 a UEID and put it in there, or you could go the other way around and hash the serial number in the X509 subject field to turn it into a UEID. Next slide. So in this picture, there's no EAT because they're kind of competitors. So this is how I kind of see my understanding of how DevID works in kind of normal practice. The one interesting part of this diagram is kind of right in the middle, where I'm showing a box that says signed nonce. I mean, there has to be a signed nonce going back from the device to the rolling party, otherwise you can have replay. And I think in most cases that's the intended implementation there is with EAP. But my understanding is that DevID does not require any particular protocol there. You could use any protocol you want. The DevID module has a signing function that would allow it to sign for any protocol. Yeah, so these could be this can be kind of seen as competing with EAT to provide device identity and manufacturing identity. Next slide. So now we can take the EAT claims and put them into X509 v3 extensions in a DevID certificate. So you could do this with an ASN1 syntax and OID for each claim. So you go through all the claims in like the CWT registry, and in addition to the labels, the labels you have defined there, you define an OID for each one and ASN1 syntax for each one, and we may have interest in doing that anyway. And then those get put into the X509 v3 extensions. Another option is just to take an encoded EAT in CBOR format, probably not signed, so UCCS, and just stuff it into the DevID. One thing to note here is this only works for static EAT claims, because DevIDs are generated by the manufacturer, not by the not on the device. So you can't use like GPS location, debug status, and some software measurements that are conducted on the device. Those can't be used there. So not everything. And also note that EAT is not the protocol between the device and the relying party or the verifier. That's probably still EAP or something like that. Okay, I think that is it. Go forward one more just to make sure one more slide to make sure I don't have any others. Yeah, there we go. So that's just a picture of what I just described. So you can see the EAT claims have been put into the IDEV-ID certificate. Okay, one more slide just to make sure I didn't forget anything. Okay, yeah, you can go back. Okay, so that leaves like 5 minutes for comments and questions. Dave?
Yeah, the good stuff, Lawrence. I like the slides. I don't have any problems with the slides. It actually made me think that there's some analogies that somebody else could do the same kind of exercise with other things. So just a couple of comments that are outside the scope of what you are trying to do that might be invitations for other people to do similar exercises. So the first comment is that when you're talking about device identifiers, there's a bunch of device identifiers that are out there or things that people use in lieu of them. And you mentioned some of them, MAC address and so on. We had the Medina Spoffer in the week where people were using MAC addresses for things because they didn't have something else, and how do we get them off of that and so on. And so a lot of the same exercise that you did, somebody else could repeat for any other type of device identifier. You could take what's the relationship between EAT and EUI64s, or what's the relationship between EAT and MAC addresses, or EAT and pick anything else that you can think of, and you could have a very similar exercise. And I see a lot of parallels between your observations here and things that would be similar observations when doing an exercise for any of these other spaces. And so I think some of the things, what you have is kind of a template for anybody else doing this kind of exercise. And a lot of these observations are generalizable to other things than just the IDEV ID that you were looking at. So good work on IDEV ID. I'd like to see people do the same thing for other things, because I think there's actually some more general observations here that I think you're exactly right about. And then the last point I would say is, although you are doing this for device identity, right? Somebody else could do an exercise that says for other types of identity that's not device identity, right? Where you talked about, EATs have things that can be used for device identity, but people could put in claims that are identities of things other than the device per se. So we'd have like software identity and COSWIDs and things. We have potentially user identity if somebody were to put that in an EAT claim, who's the owner of that kind of thing. And so you think about, well, other things like X509 certificates that are used in TLS, right? How would you embed an EAT, or what's the relationship between an EAT if you were trying to do a tested TLS, right? With a normal identity. And so again, similar exercises that I think you can take some of your observations and apply them in other cases too. So this is just an invitation, and if anybody else knows of other things that were done similar, please bring them up. But otherwise, it's an invitation to say, can other people look at things similar to what Lawrence has done here for EATs versus IDEV IDs? Thanks.
Before going on to the next comment, I've been running a bit of a side discussion with some of you, and I'll probably surface it to the list about EAT versus, or the UEID in comparison to other efforts. And in particular, there's I think it's a 9039 that just came out, which is a URN format for device identifier. So I think there's some good discussion to be had on the list, and maybe even cross working groups on this. I think Russ was next.
Hi. So do you think that the certificate extension for EAT claims needs to be defined here? And if not, where do you see that being defined?
I don't have a strong opinion on that. I mostly have enough work, so I hadn't really dug into that. So I guess not really an opinion. I would assume it's more of a just dealing with syntax and encoding rather than semantics. So maybe it's not too hard.
Well, it involves some ASN1, and I can help with that if you want.
Okay, thank you. Eric?
Right. One of the things you had mentioned was that you're going to be looking at composite devices, including structures of different elements contained into one. Especially because you're getting into identity, I think it would be good to talk about the hierarchies of identities that are going to be dependent on each other. For example, some people that do confidential compute would care first about the type of chip before they would know that the software instance is running on that kind of chip, and it could have only been running on that kind of chip, and that maybe the unique identity of a running instance of it would be there. So if you thought at all about the relationships of the identities, because the relying party is going to have to understand the types of identities and the relationships for them in order to have a policy to evaluate the relationships between those identities.
I haven't thought about it too much, mostly trying to define good, clear, useful claims. I mean, trying to think about architectures of how things are combined. Yeah, I guess we can think about that. Hopefully a lot of that is expressible via submodules in EAT. But I'm not sure. I mean, it sounds more like you're talking about policy at the verifier in terms of how those things relate. But
Yes,
I also think it's a good discussion to have too.
Yeah, just as a design principle, to figuring out what is relevant to the relying party, you want to structure your claims so that the policy language is used to digest them. You're aiming for what they care about in that policy language. Because the claims are
Yeah,
only as
yeah.
good as how you can use them.
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure.
Lawrence, you're at the top of the spot for this topic. You can continue it. You're going to be stealing from the next topic.
Yeah, I'm ready to go on.
Okay.
Next slide. All right, so this is about attestation results and EAT. So just a little kind of comment on the purpose of attestation. I mean, I see the end purpose of attestation is to give results to the relying party, because the relying party is going to make the decision about what to do. So the relying party is kind of the serving the relying party is our goal here. That's what we're trying to do. And also observe that a lot of relying parties may use machine learning, and they want every scrap of information that are even of remote value, just because there might be some correlation between something that no one thought there was a correlation between. So I think EAT is a relatively obvious choice to convey attestation results to the relying party. EAT supports JSON, which is a good representation for the server side. EAT is flexible in terms of security options, and you can have the signed format, EAT and CWT, or you can use the unsigned version with UCCS and TLS, or you can use UCCS with something else. And then getting on to more of the interesting part of this discussion is that I see a lot of the claims as appropriate to pass directly through the verifier to the relying party. And when I first came up with the idea for EAT, there was no separation between verifier and relying party. So I was thinking of all of them that way. But then this many interesting discussions later, we have an architecture and lots of interesting things going on. Okay, next slide. So I believe this is a list of claims that I think are interesting to pass through the verifier to the relying party. The nonce, although the nonce there and replay freshness, there's a lot of complexity behind that I won't go into. Certainly relying parties like device identification when the privacy policy allows, so UEID and SUEID are passed through. Relying parties may want to know the manufacturer of the hardware of the device, so OEM ID. A hardware version may not always be as useful. When I think of something like clearing financial transactions, maybe hardware version is not that exciting, but it's there and it can pass through. The assumption on all of these is that the verifier is doing some sort of at least verifying that the authenticity of these from the attester, and may be doing other consistency checks on them. So debug status, I'm going to go through these quickly. GPS location, obviously useful to the relying party. Then software manifests like COSWID. That's currently how EAT is attempting to characterize software on the device, is just through COSWID, just through reuse of COSWID. Then another really interesting one that I'm going to talk about a little bit more here later is the results of a software measurement. Something very simple where the relying party can just get more or less a thumbs up or thumbs down on whether the software measurements were validated. Note also that some testers can measure and validate subsystems. So you don't have the measurement results does not have to be carried out by the verifier. That can be done by the attester. Then key material is like Android key store. You definitely want to pass key material through to the end to the relying party, and then submodules characterizing the device. So next. So here's a couple claims that Next slide. Yeah, a couple claims that most likely are generated by the verifier for the relying party. So they did not come from the attester. So some sort of an identifier for the particular results report, a timestamp, and a nonce. Those are all fairly straightforward. The verifier may know a security level for the device, like whether it was TE or REE. And then the results of I'll get to you in a minute, Eric. The results of the software measurements, and then this thing called a DLOA, which is defined by Global Platform, which describes the certifications received by a device. So those are, I think, some claims that can be generated by the verifier for the relying party. Eric, did you still have a question?
Quick, I think that the place where the attestation results draft that we talked about last session, we're probably around the software results side and the security level side. I think it'd be interesting to normalize these two, talking about identities as well as identities of what you think are identified as levels, as well as what you think are important for the software results. So I think this is something for a good offline merger before that offsite that we have.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, next slide. So this is a description of the DLOA. This is a thing defined by Global Platform. It's basically a digital version of the digital instantiation of a letter of approval, typically issued by a certification authority. This always appears as a the document, or it's an XML document that has these fields that I've listed here in the table. That's an XML document that is always retrieved by a URL from a DLOA registrar. So the actual DLOA would never be in an EAT. Only a URL to retrieve the DLOA would be in the registrar, or would be in the EAT. So it's pretty simple. What's in a DLOA? The authority who issued it, for example, EMBCO, a identifier, which is basically kind of a sequence number, serial number. Then there's the LOA scope, which I was unable to find an example of, but I assume that is more or less has something to do with the type of certification that was granted. Then there is an identifier of the platform to which the certification was granted, and then issuance and expiration date. So next slide. So this is a proposed claim, EAT claim for a DLOA. It's just in GitHub right now. It's not in any of the drafts. So it would be an array of one or more DLOA references. So in that case, a DLOA type. And a DLOA reference basically is the fields to construct a URL to fetch the DLOA from the DLOA registrar. I won't go into details. That's all pretty straightforward stuff. The other point is that the DLOA claim would only be present in an EAT if that certification was granted. So you wouldn't just put them in, I don't know, you wouldn't put them in for any other reason. And then the DLOA scope is limited to the submodule that it's in. So it just works with submodules as all the other claims work with submodules. So I wanted to add this to EAT as seems like an important thing to know certifications, and as a really good example of something that a verifier would know, that a relying party would want to know, but the attester does not have, and you wouldn't believe it if it came from the attester. Next slide. Let me stop here and see any. We have some time here. Any comments or questions on DLOA? I can't.
In some message in the chat around, is a DLOA an endorsement? Is it an attestation result? Is it, how does it fit?
It's definitely not an endorsement. I don't think it's an endorsement. Basically, if you got an attestation about, let's say, a secure element. This is I got an attestation from a secure element, and I want to know whether that secure element had made it through a particular common criteria certification. Then the DLOA would be included as a claim in the attestation result, and the relying party could know that it received that certification. So I can't quite keep up with the chat room while I'm talking here. So please state your questions. Hank?
Yes, hi. So, and that is funny because literally the first thing I thought, oh, this is an endorsement. Because it is an expression that is like evidence, but the attester cannot create it about itself. So if it's not evidence, but it's like evidence, but coming from a third party, that is literally an endorsement, I thought. But now you're also telling me it's an attestation result content, and this seems to be all over the place. So who and how is the claim collected? This is a claim. How is it collected? Maybe that's the first question to then corner this in a little bit.
Well, the way I would expect this to happen is that the verifier would receive attestation evidence that included things like the OEM ID and the version and information about the software and hardware versions and all of that. That verifier would have a table of lookups and say, that guy, I know that this piece of hardware with this particular version has received this certification. So then the verifier inserts the DLOA into the attestation results that it sends to the relying party.
So my first thought is that this lookup is a inquiry to an endorser, fetching the endorsement, and then somehow expressing that in the attestation result that there was. But again, a relying party has to make sense of that. So there can be 1,000 types of endorsements, like this is certified by FOO, and the relying party might not need that information, just that it has some certain level of assurance now due to that. So maybe an abstraction. But I think that the actual DLOA, I hope I got that right, is fetched from the endorser, is used by policies for appraisal of evidence, and then results in some abstract attestation results content.
No, the DLOA, the actual DLOA would be fetched by the relying party. I don't think there are very many types of certifications, particularly people that are interested in them are. I mean, there's not that many certification programs. Certification's really expensive and complicated, so there's not that many. Not that many issued, so I don't think there's thousands. And it's not an endorsement because it is not telling you that the attestation evidence from this attester is to be trusted. It's telling you something about certification of the device, what certification process is.
So before I don't want to block the mic line here, actually a question: is this done in TPS and GP? The DLOA stuff? Trusted Platform Services Working Group in a Global Platform.
Probably, I don't know for sure, but my guess is yes.
Okay, great. Then I just go there and they will find out. Thanks.
Yeah. Dave?
All right, so I originally asked the endorsements question, and I got in line to say, I think your answer is correct, Lawrence, but I wanted to explain why to at least help out with the answer there. I think the DLOA, as you described it, does not say anything about the individual instance of the device. It basically says this class of devices, right? This model number has been certified, right? Where normally when we think of an endorsement, it's saying this particular instance has a private key and I'm endorsing that particular private key as being, you know, Intel Inside if I'm Intel endorsing it. It really is my thing. And it's not doing that. In that sense, Lawrence, I think you're exactly right in terms of it's not an endorsement in that sense because it's a statement about the class or model number, not a statement about the instance. And that's why it's not an endorsement. So that's what I got in line to say, but I interpreted your slide as being not this slide, but maybe the previous one, and you don't have to go back. We were talking about a claim that carries information about the DLOA, and that gets inserted by the verifier, and then you said that the DLOA was resolved by the relying party. Is the point of the claim to tell the relying party enough information so that it can resolve the correct thing? Is that the right takeaway that I should get?
Yeah, well, so that it can fetch the DLOA.
Yeah.
And then examine.
So you'd want something like a URI or some other type of identifier. It can turn into a URI, right? And that's what your LOA serial number or something like that is what you're using as the identifier of the DLOA right now, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Got it. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, Dave's questions are high value. Okay, I suspect this one will be a few minutes. This one will be kind of interesting. So I've, this is in GitHub, not in a draft. This is a proposal for a claim that summarizes at a very high level the result of a software measurement. Let me do this slide and then Eric, I'll get you, okay? The claim is defined so that it can contain multiple results. And each claim has, each result has 3 parts, maybe 4. One is a text string just describing the measurement process, product, or standard, or scheme. And then it has 2 enumerated types. One is what was enumerated. So was everything in the submodule or the device enumerated? Was it partial, or do we know enough to say, well, it was just a firmware, it was just a kernel, it was just a privileged software? Mostly, I think it would either be all or partial, with the other ones being just used in rare cases. And then the other is enumerated type that says whether, what the result of the verification was. Did the measurement run and complete and was fully verified? Did the measurement run and then fail? Did the measurement run and the results were indeterminate? Perhaps because the measurement, something went wrong with the measurement, like it was unable to parse something or something like that. So you don't really know. It could be right, it could be wrong. You could say the verification was not run, or you could say the verification was partly verified. And then you could also have another part here which says what the objective of the verification was, and that just a text string. So for example, Android kernel. Next slide. Oh, sorry, Eric. Yes. Okay, Eric, go for that. So that's all my slides. Okay, questions, Eric, go for it.
Yep. Can you go to the previous slide?
Yeah.
A couple questions on the software result, because this is the other area that hits the attestation results. We've been going under the impression that a claim of all would not be able to be relevant, because that means the relying party has to understand what was run on the verifier instead of making explicit claims. So if you don't know all your verifier's tests, to say all would mean a different thing for different verifiers. And actually, it's the slide after this. So if you can skip down one. I think it's the one after this. Also,
Yeah,
while we're into the slide catch up, the idea of things like verification, partially verified, I don't know at a relying party how to handle what partially means. As a design principle, it would be interesting to consider this. versus either a binary, it's verified or it's not. So I wonder how much, is there a design principle for trying to figure out what the relying party's policy language is to make sure you're not overloading it with things that are difficult to parse?
Well, yeah, I mean, I understand partial is pretty, could be pretty useless. One of the, but you know, when I think about, you know, verification of a sort of subsystems on an Android phone, you know, I think one of the ways you avoid partial is you structure your submodules so you don't ever have partials. So your submodule is defined to be just the Android kernel or just the TEE or just the audio subsystem or something like that, so that you can say you verified it all. I mean, I'm open to other possible solutions here. I was just trying to, you know, figure out something that could fit.
We should connect offline because I think matching this to the needs of the policy language on the relying party drives some interesting decisions here. So I could connect on the list talking about some potential design principles for the software result claim that try to drive it from how you would consume this.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of work in commit and co-rim and other things, and this is probably a difficult thing to get right. But I did think it was useful to have something that's very simple, a very simple top-level claim, because I think a lot of relying parties don't want to, you know, they don't want to see the hash values and like hear that 6 of them were matched and 5 of them weren't, and or something.
Yep,
like
I
that.
absolutely agree on that principle of getting claims that are simple and enumerated so that you can have an explicit language against them.
Yeah. Okay, I think I'm out of time.
Okay. Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you.
So we're going to go to TEEP requirements for EAT. Dave Taylor.
I'm assuming you're going to project my slides, which is fine. If so, go to the first slide. Cool. So this is requirements for the RETS working group specific to the EAT category of stuff from the TEEP working group. Okay. So the TEEP working group has a set of requirements that have gone through working group last call and just got submitted to the IESG, which are the abstract requirements. And then the protocol document, which is still in progress, then maps the requirements to what is currently listed in various EAT specs. And so what's on the screen here is not what's in there. Maybe you can think of the leftmost column as being what's in the architecture document in text form that went to the IESG. Everything but the first column is stuff that is still, you know, flexible and we can correct or whatever. Okay. And so the point is the TEEP working group has requirements for attestation results. The attestation results in TEEP are consumed by the entity in TEEP that's called the TAM, or the Trusted Application Manager. And that's what, in the case of an attestation failure, does the remediation. Okay. And so the point of the attestation results here is to pay attention to the failure results and to be able to use the results of the failure to says, this is the current state. Here's where it's out of compliance. I'm going to kick off the remediation steps. And that's what the TEEP protocol does. Okay. So as we go down the list of requirements and map those to the claims, this table or a version of it appears in the current TEEP protocol specification. And so if there are errors, please call them out or whatever. That's fine. If there are gaps. And so you'll notice that the references that it makes to right now is the EAT document and draft Burkholz RETS suit claims. And so one of them is the RETS working group document. The other one is an individual submission. And so the TEEP requirements is that we have something that's a working group document, whether it's in RETS or elsewhere, that meets the requirements on the left. Okay. So again, these are requirements for things that appear in attestation results. And you notice these are not Booleans because the point is to provide details when you're out of compliance that helps you get back into compliance. Okay. And I see Brendan's in queue, so I will pause here and take Brendan's question.
Hi, Brendan Moran. I see that the device unique ID is at the top, and I think it's important to bring up, in case it's a question. I don't actually see a need in suit in most cases for a device unique ID. I think that's a corner case in suit. So if there are particular requirements for the type of device unique ID that gets used here, I don't think that suit should have a strong preference on that. I do have strong preferences for the vendor ID and the class ID, but if you want to swap in a different device ID, I don't really have a strong preference on that, and I'm happy to see that change if necessary.
Yep, I agree that the point is these are requirements from TEEP. It's up to RATS to choose how to address these. And as I'll get to later on, my belief is that most of the things should be things that are not really TEEP specific. There's a profile that says you need the following things in attestation results, and that profile is TEEP specific. But based on previous list discussion, I don't think there's anything in the profile that's inherently only usable by TEEP. And so we'll get to that in a minute here. So, all right, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so when we look in draft Burkholz RATS suit claims, okay, it has two types of claims. There's system properties claims and there's interpreter record claims, okay? The interpreter record claims are clearly about suit, but the parts that are highlighted in yellow there was early list discussion when TEEP first introduced these requirements about could things in the EAT spec be used. And the answer at that time from, I think, Lawrence and I were in agreement on that thread that the things that were sitting in the EAT spec could not be used as then specified. And then Hank wrote this document to put those things that were discussed in that thread into this other document, and that's the highlighted ones. I'm not going to comment on 5, 6, or 7, but the 5 that are highlighted in yellow are the ones that TEEP is currently referencing this document as being the only document that tried to take a cut, and TEEP said, yep, that would work, okay? But based on the past RATS list discussion, none of these are actually TEEP specific or arguably even suit specific, okay? In the system properties claims, the ones in yellow there, okay? So really the question is that TEEP says is that the ones that are in yellow should be in some document that it can reference normatively, an IETF document, ideally, and it's not really TEEP specific and it's not really suit specific. And so that leads us to the next slide, which is the question, which is a dispatch question. Okay, so what should happen with this document? Okay, there are at least 3 options. Okay, one is, okay, RAT should adopt it, but some of those claims, being the ones at the bottom on the previous slide, are really suit specific, so you might argue that that's not right. The second option is, well, the whole document could be adopted in suit, and suit is actually rechartering to allow things like this. But it has some claims that are not suit specific, so that's possible, okay? But the top ones aren't really suit specific. They're things that could be usable outside of a suit context. So do you really want stuff in a suit working group for things that are actually system generic properties? And the third option is, well, we could split the document and say, well, the suit stuff should go into the suit working group, and the RATS working group should take on those general claims that were the ones in yellow. And my own preference would be C with the general claims added into the EAT spec, but that's a preference if you want to put them somewhere else. But my personal preference is that the parts that were highlighted in yellow should be in RATS, and the other parts that are suit specific should be in suit. This is the main question that I want discussion on. The rest is examples and what specific details about the claims, but this is a general question here that I would like working group consensus on. You notice I'm not asking for a document to be adopted here because my personal preference is the suit working group should adopt this document, but some of the content should move out into a RATS document, which is my opinion, not a new document. I'd put them into the EAT spec itself, but I'll leave that to the EAT authors to say whether the EAT spec itself wants to be defragmented or just put all the generic claims in there. I will leave that to the working group. So this is my main question. I can cover examples and stuff later on, but this is the main question from the TEEP working group to the RATS working group. I think Hank is in queue, so Hank, maybe you can correct something if I said it wrong. So,
So hi, thanks, Dave. I'm happy to see attention to this ID. It didn't get in a lot of love in the last 4 months. So this is a RATS document. It is related to the RATS working group. We discussed this as between the authors of suit and RATS authors here, and we agreed, well, the expert for this are in RATS. This is going to RATS. Even if the interpreter documents, claims are suit specific.
It's actually not clear, and so that's why I'm interested in working group opinions, because when the RATS working group was chartered, the RATS working group said that all possible claims are not going to be done in the RATS working group, just like all DHCP options are not done in the DHC working group, right?
But the authors decided to target this for RATS. That's why RATS is the first working group name here, so it's related in the RETS data tracker. We could split it, but then again, it would cause confusion because now you have to look at two different documents. This is all used by Suite. So a Suite engineer, implementer would look at the blob of it and now would have to dissect where to find anything specific. So I agree with you also that the yellow items that the TEEP wants to use, then that's why we call them system properties, and that separated them from the interpreter ones are more generic, and that's intentional. So even battery life is more generic than Suite apparently, and so but maybe not TEEP specific. So the actual all system property claims are Suite agnostic, are to be placed in RETS. And if you want the other section to be in Suite, I'm not strongly arguing against that. It cuts the idea in half.
Yeah, I'm interested in RAT's working group consensus as sort of a dispatch type working group at this point. Is what should happen? I now understand the authors want A. My personal preference is C. And of course, B would be up to the Suite working group, but I'm saying it's not out of the question from a Suite perspective, given the recharter that will be discussed tomorrow. It could come up tomorrow. And I'd like to have an answer before that discussion tomorrow in the Suite working group as to what the right dispatch answer should be here for this, at least for the yellow claims.
Does option A imply that they would be defined in EAT?
No, option A would be an EAT profile. So EAT cannot contain the world, and I hear people arguing for EAT should cross a finish line. So we don't want to deliberately overload that and delay that. So EAT is planned extensible. It has all the extensible mechanisms in there, and I think we should really work with Lawrence to make this as seamless as possible, and it can go cross the finish line only months later. I don't know. So that would be my take at it, because we also need an example that an EAT actually can do that, because we don't have a EAT edition thing, and this is the first.
Yeah, and I have a slide after this, if we get to it, it's up to the chairs whether you call time on me, that shows the example out of the TEEP architecture document. Only if an example is useful to this discussion. I think option A would be the Suite profile, which is at least the Suite interpreted claims, the bottom half of the table of contents, would be adopted as a profile in the RATS working group. Option B is the Suite profile would be adopted as a working group document in Suite. And option C is to split it so that the Suite specific parts get adopted in one of the other working groups. And I guess one could go into Suite, one could go into RATS, and it would split into two docs, of which one of those, an option would be adding it into the EAT spec and not having a new doc. So all those are possibilities. And I see a queue is built up. So go ahead, Michael.
So I would prefer A, but I want to ask before I do that, do you think that splitting the document will materially improve the time processing for either document? And the other question I have is how many, maybe I missed, how many of them are really, really Suite specific?
Go back one slide, Ned, if you can.
Yeah.
The table of contents slide, the ones at the bottom, go back to the table of contents one. I think
okay, so it was the yellow
that
ones.
one.
Okay.
Yeah, 3.2 is Suite specific. 3.1 is not.
Exactly.
So go for it again. So, those are really attractive named things. And so unless they have a really, really Suite specific thing, what I think is that someone else would come along, read the document and go, hey, actually, I want what Suite has, and we'll go forward. Or if not, I think that there's some advantage to our whole ecosystem for having well specified claims in a easily findable place. And so that's why I'm a little bit more prefer to say option A, even if that means that we say these are TEEP specific or Suite specific, and other people shouldn't use them. But at least that description is, I think, really easy to find. And but if you're really convinced that the two documents will, go through faster, then I have my doubts. But I won't sit on that. I won't. It's not a. What is the right word? It's not a sword I'm willing to fall on.
Okay, let's go on. Yep, thank you.
I'm
Yeah, so-
relinquishing the line for Lawrence. Yeah, Lawrence
Okay,
can go.
oh, please, Lawrence, I'm interested in your opinion, absolutely.
You can hear me? Yeah.
Barely.
The main thing I'm interested in is the claims that are really possible to be generic, to do the work to make them generic. Like, vendor identification seems like a really important thing to be done well in RATS and in EAT, and that seems very universal. So I'm maybe less intent on which document it goes into, and more intent in that it's well done. So I'm basically agreeing with a lot of what Michael said on that.
Okay. Ned pointing out by flipping to the slide that there's one other ask to the working group to tie into this, which is those 5, which are the ones that were in yellow before, plus one of the ones in EAT, do not have early assignment. So in the EAT document, the early assignment section makes early assignment for a number of things. It doesn't do so for one of the things in EAT that TEAP depends on. And so that leaves 6 being the 5 in yellow plus the one that's in EAT already, which if I remember right is chip version scheme, that we need early assignment for those because there's implementations right now that need to use those. There might be bugs in the actual example here if you say, because this is a simplified example, in a real example you might use sub-modules and things in here too, but in the simplified example, just to make it easy to understand, this kind of flattens everything and puts them all in one claim set. And then those TBDs are the ones that are blocking implementation right now.
So I have a wild idea. So maybe we just introduce. I haven't coordinated with this Brandon, so he might. I don't know. We might have to still talk about this. But maybe why don't we pull Lawrence onto the Red Suit claims ID? He can govern the interoperability. We can orchestrate an adoption, and then get these early assignments done for TEAP. Because I think that's the actual goal we want to achieve here. Early assignments of TBDs. So and how that really works just has to be working well. Lawrence has the overview. We have the content. Maybe that's an ideal exercise to test how the complement document works. And we have to figure this out after this call, I guess.
Yeah. So my personal opinion is that none of the 5, none of the 6 even that's listed with TBDs, just to, are things that are really suit specific. Now, maybe the wording needs to be updated to Lawrence's point about doing the work to make them be generic, but my personal opinion is, from reviewing all the drafts in question, that every single one of those that is on the screen right now in the red there actually belongs in the EAT document as not being suit specific. There's other ones that are suit specific, and not in this example. So. Okay, so I'll leave it to the chairs to figure out how to call the question, but the first one is, what's the dispatch of this document as far as the RATS working group, and is there a direction to the authors to do early assignment? Is that okay? Can we get implementation unblocked for TEAP? So
we have about 2 minutes left before we lose the bridge.
Just on early assignment, I mean, we've done early assignment once. I mean, I'm not sure for EAT, I'm not sure how many times you can do it. Seems a little, but it also seems not that bad to, assign temporary identifiers out of the, the more open space, and then you have to have a transition. But that transition is not too bad. It's on the receiving side, so I don't see early assignment as a blocker. I mean, I actually wrote the code to do that. And it's part of the C token library. It does it. So it seems like you can go either way on that. An early assignment is nice, but it's not required. So I'm happy to take wisdom on that, but that's my thought.
Ned, do you need to take it to the list, or can you give me an answer right now on what should happen with this document as far as what the working group thinks? I mean, we wanted to confirm stuff on the list, but is there any tentative thing, or do you just want to do it on the list given the right time, or how do you want to?
So we're running out of time. We think we need to move it to the list. The comments in the chat were not definitive in terms of which option to take, although option B seemed to not have any takers. So I think we need to discuss more between option A and option C, and we're going to run out of time here in seconds. So.
We have at least 3 minutes leeway. No, well, that's okay. It's fine.
So that's what I'm suggesting as chair.
Yeah, okay. I agree with the chair's opinion.
Okay.
Because
so
I have to be nice to you, someone said.
That's right.
Okay.
Okay, so with that, we're done for today's agenda, and I think what we are going to do in the future is plan for a virtual interim, so that we can address some of the topics that we weren't able to disposition during this week's meetings, and that planning will be forthcoming. So with that, thank you everybody for joining, and we will take this conversation and others to the list and be in touch. So thank you.
Thank you, Ned.
Yep.
Thank you, Kathleen, Ned, and yeah, Nancy, who is not here with us anymore.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy and Roman.
Thank you.
Roman's also gone, damn it.
Being recorded, so thank you, Nancy and Roman.